Hello again, everybody. Troy Turbyville back with another edition of Ville on the Ville, a full show, if you will, here on the YouTube channel. I had wanted to get this done a little earlier this week. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was destroyed with a headache, absolutely incapacitated, so I wasn't able to get that done. It hit me hard. Actually, in preparation for this, I was getting some graphics done, and it just slammed me, and I was out. So probably a good thing, because as I was getting ready to record this episode, news breaks. And it wasn't the news we thought might break on this Friday. Peter Sirmon resigned his position as defensive coordinator for the Louisville football team. This was, oddly enough, a surprising announcement, a surprising move. Not many of us really expected this. Now, if you would have said this in the middle of the season, it would have been completely expected. But really, the way things were in the bowl game, early on it was rough, as we talked about before, but in my mind, and really in a lot of people's minds, he bought himself at least another year on the job, the way the defense kind of dug in and got the job done for the balance of the game after a shaky start. But, who knows the reasons behind this? Perhaps it was already in the works, and they just spent a little more time before announcing it. None of us will probably ever really know the full story. But that's the big news so far on this Friday. Peter Sirmon has resigned as the defensive coordinator for the Louisville Cardinals. And now, of course, the question becomes who is going to be his replacement. Names are already being floated out there. Court Dennison, the linebackers coach, already on staff, is getting a lot of talk. Another name, Vance Bedford, has come up quite a bit as well. Of course, he was here before with Charlie Strong, and those defenses, of course, were always very good. Now, how much of that credit is Vance Bedford? How much of it is the defensive mind of Charlie Strong? Who really knows? But there'll be plenty of time to figure this out. Now, positions like this, vital in recruiting oftentimes, are they going to move quickly? You think they might. So who knows how quickly we will know who the replacement will be for Peter Sirmon. But that's the big news to start the show today, that Peter Sirmon has resigned as the DC for the University of Louisville. Now, moving on to things that are actually happening on the court. The men's team, obviously, the other night, as I shot a quickie the other day, a quick take, talking about the basketball team getting that huge win in South Bend in double overtime, to no surprise, of course, over the Irish. A game in which Ray Spalding was fantastic. And again, as I've said over the past few weeks, Ray Spalding is no longer the guy you've got to worry about. He's bringing it every night. His only off night was when he struggled with those terrible foul calls against Virginia Tech. He was just limited in minutes. But the times he's been out there, he has provided consistent production on both points and rebounds, as well as steals, deflections, blocks. He's pretty much doing it all in the effort level. And really, it's always been the story with Ray Spalding. If the effort is there, production follows. So we're seeing that consistent effort from him. And he has really shown that he's really the cog from which everything's going to run for this Louisville team, at least as far as the front court is concerned. The back court, we're seeing Quentin Snyder get the job done. Him and Ray Spalding, both career nights scoring against the Irish. Ray Spalding goes for 23. Quentin Snyder goes for 22, scoring more than half of their points in this double overtime game. So both guys came up huge. Quentin Snyder hit some big shots down late in regulation. Some great little tough floaters in the lane in overtime. 7 assists. Did have a couple turnovers, but 7-2 is a pretty solid ratio, so you're not going to complain about that. And I think most of his turnovers came early. He finished the game very strong. So love what we're seeing from Quentin and Ray Spalding. Other guys, Jordan Nwora. The All Points Bulletin was out on, if he was even on the team anymore, he was seen on some milk cartons. He shows up again. I think a lot of people had started to get concerned that he may get discouraged to the point he may not be around next year, because he simply had not been seen, I don't think, in any action since the ACC we had started playing the ACC. He comes in, not only comes in, but comes in pretty early in the first half and provided a spark for the team. Got some steals, hit 4 free throws, got a layup as well. Good production from Jordan Nwora. So that's that little nugget he needed to keep him invested and involved in playing well for the Cardinals. So great to see him get in there. I had really seen a lot from him rebounding the ball and hustle and energy, and really thought early on he was going to be a guy from the freshmen at least that you'd see a lot out of and may provide the most from that class. But lately, again, Malik Williams had played more. and less for Jordan Nwora. Another guy, Darius Perry, mentioned that in the quick take, how he came in. He was called on to harass Matt Farrell. Farrell really had taken the game over after Louisville had kind of made a little run to get a little bit of a lead. Farrell really took over, hit shots, got a steal, a transition layup, three-point play, pushed the Irish out to a 10-point lead. He had 15 points in under 13 minutes of play. Perry goes in, dogs him defensively, shuts him down really the rest of the first half, and allows Louisville to make that run to take the lead at the half and really get them back in the game and show everybody they're not going away. He was used a little bit in the second half as well, but I think what David Padgett did, and again, the evolution of everybody on this team, the new guys, the coaching staff, the experienced players adjusting to the new coaches and new players they're playing with. David Padgett decided, he went with Darius Perry early. Then he came in and mixed it up. He put Deng Adel on Matt Farrell. Then he put VJ King on Matt Farrell. And he kept kind of rotating it around to make sure that Farrell never got comfortable and you never really saw him get in a groove again after he hit that really hot stretch in the first half. Again, he had 15 points in under 13 minutes of play to start the game. He finished with 23 points. So 37 more minutes when you include the 10 minutes of overtime. Farrell only had 8 points after starting off so hot. So that was a key component of Louisville not only winning the game, but just staying in it after Farrell had shown that he might himself take the game over. And, of course, his experience was huge. Notre Dame getting him back, that was a big concern. You saw leading up to the game, you saw things on Twitter after they had lost that game in really disappointing fashion. They probably weren't expecting to compete with North Carolina, missing their top two players, but they were right there at the end and had 2 shots just rim out the buzzer that would have won the game. So they were going to come in angry, play angry is what they had said. So really, being that it was in South Bend, being that, Louisville struggled up there, they're getting Farrell back, they're going to play angry. You were almost expecting the worst. So for Louisville to weather that storm and get the job done, even though it took double overtime, but we've become accustomed to that between Louisville and Notre Dame. A great win for the Cardinals. Somebody else that contributed, kind of had a rough go of it for a while, but late really contributed defensively was Anas Mahmoud. And you saw him really kind of lock down Farrell as well on the perimeter. Farrell tried to get some shots off. He's blocking him. He locked him down as both Gibbs and Farrell made moves to the basket. Anas was there to challenge and block shots. It seemed like every time there in the overtime periods that they were trying to penetrate, did a really good job. So his numbers overall weren't all that great. I think he only had like 4 rebounds, 4 blocks. They all seemed to come late and really were key in keeping Louisville ahead in this game. But something I saw, and this is another thing, the evolution of Padgett as a head coach, running different sets. They tried on a couple occasions to run a high-low deal with Anas and Ray Spalding. With those two in the game, that's something you really got to take advantage of when you have a guy like Mahmoud who's so tall and long and can see over defenses, Ray Spalding who is long, who can catch passes. Now, the only problem was, and I'm going to show a little sequence here, this was in the first overtime. Louisville had gotten out to a lead, and they ran the high-low. And if you look here, look what they've got here. I mean, this should be points without question. If you look at the setup here, it's absolutely what you want to see. You've got Ray Spalding, got his man pinned out, asking for the ball. There's not a Notre Dame defender, not only below Ray Spalding's man, but they're really not even realizing how much room he's got under the basket. And Anas is there ready to throw the pass. Now, when he caught this pass, when he got the ball from McMahon, he should have fired that ball immediately, but he hesitated, and I think that let Notre Dame get settled a little bit and get ready. But then, as he threw the ball, he really didn't get it deep enough. And as you can see here in the second clip, it's about halfway to Spalding, and it really isn't much higher than when Anas threw the ball. And at this point, I think also Ray Spalding kind of got his leverage off his man, allowing him to kind of get upright and be able to attack the pass. But again, that pass is so short. And if you see on the last one here, when it gets to Ray Spalding, he's nowhere near the basket, and it's an easy play out for the defender to get up there and intercept it. All Mahmoud has to get used to doing is, you've got a guy in Ray Spalding who has a massive wingspan. When he has that much room and he's got his man sealed off like he did and there's no other defender around, just throw that ball at the rim. That should be a bang-bang play. So I like the look of that. it just comes down to make sure that's a good pass for Mahmoud, and really that's something he should be able to make because he's shown the ability to be a good passer. I think it's just a question of getting used to making that pass, knowing where to put it for Ray. So I'm sure that's something they're going to work on, but that's a set that I really like to see and hope to see more of it moving forward. And you could even invert that because something else you saw to Ray Spalding in this game was the mid-range jump shot. I tweeted out, how about mid-range Ray looking like Gorgie Zhang when he got to where he could hit that free throw jump shot. I think Spalding hit 2 or 3 in a row when Notre Dame was just daring him to take it. And he said, all right, I'm going to take it. And he hit every single one of them. When he starts doing that, imagine him running that high-low. That really makes the defender force out and allow, if you've got Anas Mahmoud in the post with just one guy, to really have a clear-out situation there. So we'll see moving forward. I like watching this team develop as a whole. I said all along I'm really going to not try to develop a feeling for this team. What do I expect out of them until we got to February? And have I been aggravated? Sure. I've tweeted out stuff at certain times. In particular against Kentucky, I think a lot of us really got the sense that I don't want to say they quit, but it's just they got discouraged. I think a lot of that had to do with the officiating, the way it was kind of called, not really balanced on each end. They let that bother them, which you can't do, but I think they've learned from it. They learned that things are going to get tough sometimes. Calls might not go your way. You may have a tough whistle. You may get down, but you got to dig in and fight, and they've shown that. They fell short at Clemson, but then at Florida State and then again at Notre Dame, they got behind double digits at Notre Dame early, fought back, saw adjustments. So some encouraging signs from everybody across the board, the experienced guys, the new guys, the coaching staff. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And it's going to be fun watching as they move forward going on. And next up will be this Sunday. They host Boston College. I've got the pod system back up here. I'm going to just keep that updated. So far, they've won the first 2 pods. With that win over Notre Dame, they go 2-0 in pod 2. So now they're looking for a perfect pod, which kind of gives them some leeway, gives them a little bit of room for error as they go forward beyond here, so if they can get that win over Boston College. So home game's vital, so we'll see moving forward. Now, Boston College wins over Duke and Florida State. Now, granted, those were in Boston, but a little more formidable of an opponent than they've been in the past. So not quite the easy take that it's been, the gimme, if you will, over the Eagles. So we'll see how that goes this Sunday. Another team that obviously has been in action, the women last night took out Pittsburgh in a game that was really pretty ugly. Watched most of it, missed just a little bit. It seemed like the minutes that I missed, they played really well. But early on, very sloppy, tough shooting for the Cardinals early. Pittsburgh, I think, had 9 turnovers in the first quarter, but nonetheless, Louisville only led by 4 after 4 at halftime. Opened the second half on a good run. I missed the first few minutes of the second half, and that's when they put a little bit of a mini run together, got a double-digit lead, and kind of held that most of the third quarter. The fourth quarter is where they really just dropped the hammer, started it with an 18-0 run that was a part of a 21-2 run overall, and that was it. That was the ball game. They rolled a 20-0, 77-51 final score. And oddly enough, usually I pick up things like this, but I didn't. I saw it on Twitter, so credit to whoever posted. Exact same score the men beat Pittsburgh by. So I don't know how often that happens. That's a Kelly Dickey question, I guess. Maybe I should tweet him and ask how often Louisville men's and women's teams had defeated the same team by the same score in the same year. But they get the win. Very balanced attack. Maisha Hines-Allen, 13 points. That led all scorers for Louisville. Grabbed 18 rebounds. She was an absolute monster on the boards. I don't think another player had more than 2 or 3 rebounds. She just gobbled them all up. And she really could have had 4 or 5 more. I think there were a few times where she kind of almost had a rebound, got it knocked away. So she really could have put up an amazing night collecting rebounds. But 18 is pretty darn good. And she just used her strength inside to get seemingly every ball that came near her. So a great job on the boards for her. And now, at 20-0 and atop the ACC, the women will host Florida State on Sunday. And the Seminoles scraped by last night. I tuned in. I thought I remembered they were playing. I tuned in to watch them finish the game against Wake Forest. Went into overtime, and really, Florida State went out of their way to do everything they could to lose the game. They weren't hitting shots. they took a really bad shot late. Wake Forest, I think, missed like 5 or 6 free throws down the stretch that in a one-score game. It was a 3-point game. Florida State had the ball with the shot clock off, threw an inbounds pass, wasn't getting fouled, and they just shot like a 15-foot shot for no reason. Wake Forest got the ball down 3, goes down, and Florida State fouls them on a 3-point shot, and of course, missed the second free throw, so the game was pretty much over. There was under a second left, but Florida State, not probably one of their better games. This is a team ranked very high. They had been scoring, I think they had hit over 100 points in the previous 2 games before Wake Forest, so they had kind of been on a roll. But it looks like they're a team not as strong on the road. Their previous road game before Wake Forest, they lost to Syracuse, played 2 very good home games, then went to Wake Forest and struggled. So hopefully, and from what I've heard, there's going to be a very good crowd. I said hopefully they can pack 10,000 more in like they did against Notre Dame at the Yum Center. And somebody responded on Twitter and said they've already sold 11,000 tickets. That is fantastic. So if you can get out there Sunday at 5 o'clock, it's going to be a doubleheader for the men and women. Get out there because they're going to need that support. Florida State, probably the second best team that has come to the Yum this year to take on the ladies. And take a quick drink so I don't cough like I did last time. So moving forward, we'll see. Obviously, UConn down the road. For the ladies, UConn played at Texas, very close game this past week. I think it was a 2-point decision. But as they showed last night, the women, when they come to play, I think they can beat anybody. But if they don't come quite dialed in, they can lose to, I'm not going to say lose to anybody, but any number of teams, major conference teams, can give them trouble. So they're still not to the point where they can just show up and win. And I think that was a good lesson they learned last night in that fourth quarter. Very good indicator that they can dial it in and get focused and bring it when they need to. Now, hopefully they'll just start doing that from the onset against these teams that they should beat, but just can't show up to beat. Next up, Jeff Walz continues rolling. The ladies obviously continue to win. Jeff Walz landed a huge commitment, 6'4". Romani, not sure if I said it right. For the 2019 class, a top 20 recruit. So things just keep getting better, building on that momentum from year to year, building on the success he's had before, bringing the class in this year, seeing them develop. And this women's team, they're not going to lose very much. Obviously, Hines Allen's a huge part of this team, but not losing a whole lot outside of that. So they're going to return a whole lot. So when they start bringing others in, now next year it's going to be different. So Parker's going to be a part of that class next season where they're probably going to have to replace a whole lot more than they do this season. So that's going to be big. So it's always good to hear when any of the teams can land a big recruit, and Jeff Walz has it rolling. So congratulations on landing that commitment from Romani Parker. Big body there, 6'4", can do a little bit of everything, so it's good because you got to have that size in the women's game. That's what UConn does. They just keep bringing these taller players in that just plug and play, just keep going, and that's been the difference in the past. UConns of the world, Louisville can kind of compete in that starting 4 or 5, top 4 or 5 players. But beyond that, that's when Louisville would have the drop-off and just couldn't quite stick with it and match that depth. And that's what really set apart the UConns and the Baylors of the world and really the Notre Dames before. But Louisville's getting to that point. When they bring the women off the bench, not much of a drop-off. And you see against Notre Dame the way they just steamrolled them. And then that is why you had that depth. Last night against Pittsburgh, Asia Durr, the leading scorer, can go off of 30 any night, only had 9 points, had an off night. Still win by nearly 30 when it was all said and done. So that's that depth that really is helpful in that balanced attack that they had with only the leading scorer just 13 points from Hines Allen. So the women keep going. Now, again, the Sunday doubleheader. Going to review it one more time. The men play Boston College at noon, and then the women turn around at 5 o'clock. The evening game against Florida State. If you can get out there for both of them, that will be fantastic. These teams are both riding some momentum. Keep it going. Need those fans out there. The women in particular, the men's crowds haven't been as great, but typically they're usually pretty good. But the women, the way they're rolling, and if you weren't there for that atmosphere against Notre Dame, I really think you owe it to yourself to get out there and try to be there this Sunday because it was insane. And they really deserved it. Jeff Walz, they worked so hard, doing what they've done over the past few years, And now this team this year, as Walls has said himself, just has more of a family feel to it, working so hard. And to see that moment they had against Notre Dame, not just national TV, but have all those fans there cheering them on. And you could tell, I think that definitely was responsible somewhat for the way they played. The energy was fantastic. The crowd was great. So get out there if you can. It's such a cheap ticket when you compare it to what other things you can do. Comparing it to the men's games, you can get in there for very, very reasonable prices. And it's a lot of fun, and they play hard, and they're one of the best teams in the country. This could be a special year moving forward. So big Sunday coming up at the Yum Center for both squads, men's and women's. Now, looking really quick, I wanted to take a look at the standings in the ACC. Now, something we expected is the women's team to be atop the ACC because they're pretty darn good, right? The men's team is what we did not expect. They have managed to get themselves into currently second place in conference at 4-1. They're now alone in second because Georgia Tech lost, I believe, last night. I think Georgia Tech just had one loss. But now Louisville, the only team in the conference with one loss, sitting behind Virginia, of course, as the Seminoles are just rolling along. The Cavaliers are just rolling. Their only loss, I believe, was at West Virginia. They have just been, and that's actually who beat Georgia Tech last night, if I'm not mistaken, in just a typical Virginia game. I think it was like 64-48. Louisville, of course, gets Virginia twice this year. I don't know who the dominatrix was that spun the schedule wheel and said, we're going to make Louisville play Virginia twice every year. But at some point, hopefully that'll stop, and we won't have to play Virginia twice every year. But unfortunately, that's going to happen again this season. Now, we've seen David Padgett already do two things Rick Pitino struggled to do in the ACC. Win at Notre Dame, or really in the ACC or the Big East as far as winning at Notre Dame, and winning on the road against a ranked opponent. He's done those two things already, so who knows? At this point, maybe Virginia should be worried taking on Louisville because David Padgett was able to do what Rick Pitino couldn't do on those other two things. So maybe we'll see a little bit of a difference when they take on the Cavaliers down the road. But a great start, the 4-1. Get BC this week, you move to 5-1, and then the schedule really ramps up. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Cardinals handle those big matchups. North Carolina, Duke, Virginia twice. Not going to get any easier. So this team, again, I'd said let's wait till February, if I can talk, before we really analyze what kind of team they are. We're definitely going to know by mid-February. This team could be really good. Who knows? Or they could struggle a little bit. But I think there was some speculation on Twitter. Some people had asked, do you think 20 wins gets them in? I think at this point 20 wins does because they've won a couple tough road games, something I don't think they really did last year, and they got a 2 seed. So they can probably handle a few more losses this year and still manage to get in the tournament comfortably. I wouldn't be too worried if they can get to that 20-win plateau and be at least 500 or maybe a game or two above in conference. But again, this great start certainly allows them a little bit of margin for error moving forward, but it will really help if they can go ahead and get that win Sunday against BC. Now, the other thing that came out this week, and most of you have probably already seen, the football schedule was released for the men, obviously, it's football. And here it is on your screen. Nothing groundbreaking. Again, you've probably already seen it. The unique thing about this is 7 home games. It starts off, obviously, in Alabama on a neutral game with the Crimson Tide in Orlando. Then they come home with a couple games, Indiana State and Western, which should be interesting. There was some speculation that Samford down at Western Kentucky was in the running for the Arizona job, which sort of surprised me, to be honest, because I think there were a lot of people at Western weren't real happy with the way things were turned out this year for the football team. A little bit of a disappointment. So we'll see. I don't think anything really came of that. But then they start off ACC play at Virginia, then return home for Florida State, and then on a Friday night, a short week, you get Georgia Tech. The irony there is, for the past couple years, Georgia Tech, Paul Johnson had complained adamantly that a lot of teams in the ACC were getting a bye week before they played the Yellow Jackets. So naturally, Louisville gets a short week. to prepare for the triple option attack. So that should shock nobody that Louisville gets the short end of the stick, getting ready for Georgia Tech, coming off the big game against Florida State and a short week. Then they move up to Boston College on the 13th of October, Wake Forest back at home. Then the game at Clemson in November. Last 2 years, that game had been the third game of the season. Or excuse me, not the third game of the season, but early in the season. Now this moves back to November. I don't know if they've even played Clemson before that late, so we'll see how that goes. And then it's a Friday night game at Syracuse, so knock the orange teams out in about a 6-day span there. And then they return home to finish out the slate with North Carolina, of course, the rivalry game against the Wildcats of Kentucky. So that's a look at the schedule. You've probably already seen it. And again, I think the unique thing with that is 7 home games and only 4 road games. Of course, you've got that neutral site game to start things off. So probably I don't know if I've ever seen a schedule like that for Louisville in terms of the home and away ratio being that much off. 7 home, only 4 away. So in terms of that, it's a good schedule, but I think it's a challenging schedule. Indiana State obviously should be a gimme. Western, you think they should be able to handle that one, but I don't know exactly what to expect from Western. They've shown that they're very competitive as of late. Now with Braum gone, didn't quite see that this past year, but the Hilltoppers have, and it's going to be fun just to have that game again. There's so many Hilltopper fans in Louisville that would like to get out to that game. You have secondary fans, that cheer for Western and U of L. Of course, there's a lot of people at Western associated with Louisville in the past, so I think that should be a good game, and I'm glad they signed that. There had been a lot of talk about it for years, especially when Braum was there, and actually signed this when Braum was there. Of course, now he's not. But nonetheless would still be fun to see them come in here next fall to take on the Cardinals. I'm going to wrap things up there for this week. No news on the appeal. That's the one other thing I was going to talk about. And nothing really came of it. I expected this might be the week. I'd been hearing it. I think everybody had been seeing it on Twitter. That appeal news, is it going to break? And if it does and it's late in the week, is it going to be bad? Some hope. I mean, again, people speculate. Nobody knows anything because they're not going to put this information out. They're not going to leak it out to anyone. U of L is going to get it first. I guess at that point, if something gets leaked out, it would be from U of L. But I would hope that if anything gets leaked out, it's good news. And at this point, if we haven't heard, this is as of Friday, Eric Crawford said that on Thursday, nobody at U of L had anything, and they're going to get it a day ahead of the public release. So at the earliest, they would get it today. And if you don't hear anything, then that's probably not good news, because if they're going to leak something out, it's probably positive, if anything. So it's looking like next week before we hear. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. Initially, I thought if it was released later in the week, especially the Friday of the NFL playoff conference championship games, that would be like a Friday news dump of the ultimate kind, that would be bad. But then somebody said, well, maybe that's a good thing. If they have allowed Louisville to keep the banner, they were going to kind of hide that on that Friday. So maybe that will be good, and that's actually a really good point. So now, with the news not coming out, I'm kind of a little worried if this pushes into next week. If we get this news on Monday, a little weary that it might not be very good news. But as I've said all along, my thoughts on it are expect the worst. I don't anticipate they're going to change anything. My personal feelings are that the banner should stay up. As I've said before, I'm not going to go into it in detail again. But it looks like it's going to be next week, which I guess will put us on the 22nd at the earliest, before we would hear anything. So we push into yet another week. Seems like we've been saying this for how long? It's almost over. It's almost over. One more week of the appeal before we get this phase of things done. And we'll know as far as the banner moving forward if that is going to stay up. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of Ville on the Ville. If you've turned in, I greatly appreciate it. And as always, go Cards.